My top 5 Inspector Morse episodes. Yes, finally I have managed to narrow down the episodes to a top 5 list. It's difficult, it really was, but I've managed it nonetheless. These are, in my personal opinion, the 5 best episodes. You're free to disagree, of course. Before I get into the episodes I've chosen, allow me to share with you a really wonderful rendition of the theme tune that I found. It's a guy with an acoustic guitar. Looks like he's in a church in Oxford, perhaps. Let's have a listen. I don't know about you, but I always get goosebumps when I hear that theme tune. Very powerful, of course. Certainly one of my favourite television theme tunes. Now, episode 5, my in on my list. Last Seen Wearing. Last Seen Wearing is the story of a privately educated rich kid who goes missing. Valerie Craven. Morse is reluctantly assigned to the case. At first, he's adamant that Valerie Craven is dead. Lewis, on the other hand, is convinced she's still alive. Last Seen Wearing was one of author Colin Dexter's original Morse novels. His books are very different from the television adaptation. In the books, Lewis is actually older than Morse, and he isn't a Geordie. So that's very confusing when you read the books after, because naturally most of us watch the television show first, and then we read the books, and it's very confusing because we visualize that iconic duo, John Thor, Kevin Whately, but the author is describing the characters very differently. You know, Lewis is older, more experienced. Morse doesn't drive a red Jag. Can you believe that? We can't imagine Morse without the red Jaguar, without his Geordie sergeant. So the television show is really quite different. It made some improvements, as in my opinion. Perhaps Dexter, even Colin Dexter, would agree. The adaptation of Last Seen Wearing was the first episode of Morse that I ever saw. I was attracted to it initially because the actor Peter McHenry plays the head teacher Donald Phillipson. Of course, Peter McHenry is one of my favourite actors. He always has been. McHenry plays the suave, aristocratic head teacher perfectly. He's a kind of narcissistic womanizer with a chip on his shoulder. Episode number 4, Driven to Distraction. DC Maitland joins Morse and Lewis to identify a serial killer who is killing women in their homes in Oxford. The trio are led to an Oxford car dealership. The dealership is the only connection shared by all 3 victims. This is a fantastic episode. The dynamic between Morse and Maitland is an interesting one to watch. They clash at first. Morse is rather thrown by this confident female copper from up north, but their relationship does develop, and it grows. It grows into a mutual respect. Kind of grows, and they together they solve this case. But and by the way, throughout this video, I won't reveal the kind of conclusions of each episode because I don't want to spoil anything if you haven't already seen uh, an episode. I want you to watch it. If you are encouraged to watch any of these episodes, obviously I wouldn't want to spoil it. Next episode number 3. Second time around, a very enticing episode. Every time I watch it, I'm gripped. You know, even though I know what happens, I can't take my eyes off it. A respected copper is killed in his own home. He was working on his autobiography, detailing all the notable cases of his storied career at Thames Valley. As you can see from the photo that I used here, Kenneth Colley plays Detective Dawson, an old nemesis of Morse. They realise that this murder is connected to an infamous case from about 20 years ago, the tragic killing of a young girl. Turns out that this was one of the cases that the murdered policeman was going to write about in his book. Morse, Dawson, and Lewis, of course, have to revisit this very disturbing kind of tragic case. The episode features Christopher Eccleston as the character Terence Mitchell, a very early credit for Eccleston, who went on to play Doctor Who, I believe, in perhaps the late 1990s. He's quite young in this episode, the early days of his career. The next episode 2 on my list, Last Bus to Woodstock. The plot. When an attractive blonde in a yellow raincoat hitches a late-night lift at a bus stop, she ends up dead outside a busy pub. Yes, so surely an interesting episode. Just from that kind of synopsis there, hard to resist. This is what I'd call vintage Morse, a very early episode. This is in fact the final episode to feature the actor Peter Woodthorpe, who played the pathologist Max. And it really it puts you into perspective when you watch the earliest episodes how unusual this television show was at the time. Each episode was 2 hours long, the length of a feature film. You know, I think that was unheard of in British television before. Quite groundbreaking television, really. It's just to think, each episode is 2 hours long. That must have been quite a gamble, or quite a peculiar thing to do back in the late 80s when Morse first aired on television. Now, episode 1, my favourite episode of Morse, Cherubim and Seraphim. I thought long and hard, and the conclusion I've come to is that this is my favourite episode. The plot. A new drug developed to combat conditions such as Alzheimer's or dementia, conditions that typically we associate with the elderly. The drug is ironically being distributed to teens at all-night parties, kind of raves, and it tragically drives some of them, two of them in fact, to suicide, including Inspector Morse's niece, Marilyn. We didn't know he had a niece until this episode. She tragically overdosed. And this is a very emotional episode. John Thor's performance is exceptional. Morse is very vulnerable in this episode, and we get to see his wounds. You know, his dependence on Lewis is emphasised in this episode. It is clear throughout the series that Lewis is first and foremost a family man. You know, his job is just about putting food on the table. Once he finishes at the end of the day, he goes home. He doesn't think about his job. Whereas Morse, you know, a bachelor, is an absolute workaholic. Being an inspector is his life. Similarly to Lewis, Morse is just his boss. But Lewis is a very important person to Morse. And Lewis is almost a comforting presence in his life. He needs him. He relies upon Lewis, as he doesn't have children. He's a bachelor. He's never married. He was particularly close to his niece Marilyn, but now she's overdosed. Morse needs his sergeant more than ever. I don't think Lewis ever fully realised how much he meant to Morse. You know, throughout the series, he often tries to break free from Morse. He often gets paired with different chief inspectors, making Morse jealous in a rather endearing kind of way. You know, we see Morse as this emotionally closed-off character. He bottles up his emotions, but occasionally he opens up to Lewis. And in this episode especially, you know, when he's really vulnerable, he'll call him Robbie, you know, his first name, and that's when you know Morse is in a bad place. A constant writer on the show was Daniel Boyle, not the famous director Danny Boyle, who did Trainspotting and other things, but that Danny Boyle, who became the famous director, does direct this episode and one or two others in the early days of his career, and especially this episode, you can sense the potential in this episode. Directed by the Daniel Boyle. There we have it, folks. The top 5 episodes, in my opinion. Morse is my favourite TV detective. If you haven't already seen these episodes, I thoroughly recommend them. This is British TV at its finest.